Okay, it's 2 o'clock. Come on in. Lots of seats, lots up front, don't be afraid. I understand that on the app, it said that this talk was in room D1, so that also possibly means that something else was advertised as being in this room. So if you're not in here for the MultiCloud for Realz talk, we've already shut the door, you can't leave. So you're in for a treat. We've got a really, really fun, awesome group of experts assembled for you. So we won't disappoint you. Well, depending on what the talk you were coming in to hear was. If it was some sort of, lion taming act, we'll try to work that in, but no guarantees. But anyway, we'll go ahead and get started. So keep on coming up, don't worry. Okay, I will let my panelists introduce themselves, but I just will start out by saying I am really excited to be on stage with this particular group of people. I always love choosing panels with an incredibly diverse skill set, diverse way of thinking, diverse jobs, and so we've got a little bit of everything up here for you, and also really, really good people. So it's a pleasure to share a stage with Umair, Joseph, Eric, and Allan. This is us on Twitter. I want to encourage everybody to keep the conversation going. If you don't get a question in for us today, I'll try to leave a little room at the end for questions, but I don't see microphones, so I'm not sure how that would work. But if you don't get your question in today, you can ask us at any time. We will answer it. Since I don't see microphones, I have turned my DMs on. Courageously, don't spam me, but if you want to ask a question, you can DM me on Twitter. They should be open and available to everyone, and I'll go ahead and do my best to get your question in. And if you want to be anonymous, you can not mention who you are or tell me not to mention who you are. That's totally fine. Introverts, totally with you. Okay, so why don't I go ahead and let everybody introduce themselves. Joseph, we can start with you.
Sure. I'm Joseph Sandoval. I'm with the Adobe Advertising Cloud. I myself and my team, we run all the infrastructure that spans data center to public clouds, and we do it at scale, serving up in the global ad space.
Hello, my name is Umair Mufti. I'm with Dreamworks Animation. I manage the data services team at Dreamworks, so my team is responsible for deploying and administering all of the databases for the entire studio.
Hello, I'm Allan Naim. I'm part of the product management team at Google. I work on Anthos. And Anthos is a platform that delivers a consistent developer and operations experience based on Google Kubernetes engine that runs in the cloud, multi-cloud, on-prem, and hybrid.
Hi, I'm Eric Hahn. I'm responsible for product management at Portworx, a cloud-native data management startup. And I've had the joy of working with Allan back at Google and some of Umair back from early days as a customer. So.
And I usually like to introduce my panelists because they're all so modest and they never brag about themselves. I've worked with many of them for many years and they're so talented. Relevant to this crowd, Eric Hahn was the first product manager on Kubernetes when he was at Google. He's the co-creator of GKE. So just had to brag about him a little bit, and I have the pleasure of working with him daily, which is awesome for me. Okay, so I didn't introduce myself. I'm Lisa. I was asked to be part of this panel because I run the world's largest CNCF user group, and I've been orchestrating and architecting communities and user groups for many, many years. And so I've done, over 25 meetups on Kubernetes and Istio and Service Mesh and so many topics that are relevant to our ecosystem. And I'm very passionate about this community and this technology. So it's a great pleasure to be here and to meet so many of you in person. Our meetup is also online, so usually, you can check us out if you don't happen to live in the San Francisco Bay Area and can come visit us live. Okay, so I want to start with a question for Umair, because Umair's at Dreamworks, and this was the intro of a Forbes article, And actually, before we ask Umair, this article talked about Dreamworks going to multi-cloud. But before that, as you can see, multi-cloud is one of those buzzwords, you can say, that may be replacing or being added to a lot of these other cloudy words, like public, private, hybrid cloud. There's multi-cluster. There's hybrid multi-cloud, maybe. So Eric, will you just take a minute and talk about how we're going to view multi-cloud for the purpose of our discussion today?
Yeah, I think we had a conversation yesterday, so I'll just, for the sake of expediency, summarize. I think multi-cloud is the idea that I can thoughtfully deploy my application to any cloud, any infrastructure. And so from that perspective, we might differ about the workloads that we're thinking about. We might differ about the strategy or what's the driving motivation. And also, I think there's different ways to do it. But I think the key ingredient here is multi-cloud is really talking about that I am infrastructure agnostic in how I'm able to put my applications out there, right? So I don't want to say we agree on everything. In some ways, that makes it interesting. But I do think that it's useful to have at least one core that is pretty reasonable. And so.
Okay, so I will, thank you, Eric. So now I will ask Umair, and I'm sorry I put the wrong date on here. It auto-filled into today's date, but this article was actually in Forbes last year. I'll fix that before we resubmit these slides. And so maybe if you can talk about a little bit Dreamworks' plans to go multi-cloud and really where you're seeing the value and why you would want to do this.
Yeah, sure. So for us, multi-cloud really just is all about finding the best talent around the world. For us in the media industry, that really means artists. We make cartoons. We're a movie company, so we need to go out and find the best artists wherever they live. We have no, we're under no illusion that all the best artists are in Los Angeles, where we're located. So we really wanted to go out and find the artists where they live. That might be in Omaha, that might be in London, wherever it happens to be. The thing that complicates matters for us, all the tooling that our artists use is all custom tooling, all based on service-oriented architecture. So we throw up services currently in our own data center and in the cloud. So what we need to do if we were to bring on a new artist located again in Omaha or London, is basically stand up an entire service stack as close as possible to where that artist lives, so that artist's user experience can be as performant as possible. It wouldn't make sense for all the services to come back and hit data centers in Los Angeles. And so that cloud might be Google, that cloud might be Amazon. If it's in Los Angeles, that cloud might even be our own data center. But all those artists working around the world all need to collaborate on the same movie and have the same experience using the same data, using the same tooling. And so we kind of have to sort of virtualize that entire pipeline, so they're all working on the same set of data. So that's basically what multi-cloud means for us.
Okay. And Joseph, at Adobe, can you tell us a little bit about why you're so interested in multi-cloud and what it means for you?
Yeah. So for the Adobe Advertising Cloud, kind of, similar motivations for us in regards to like customer reach. And part of it is it's almost like accidental in a certain sense. We have a platform that is highly transactional. We have low latency requirements. So we do have like 6 data centers around the world. But we want to use public cloud as a way to reach, not so much in the sense of where we have like edge use cases, but when we have like emerging markets, it's so much more easier for us to be able to spin something up in a region that will serve those customers, and we can vet out whether that region is going to support us there. And the thing about that, though, is there's challenges with that, and that's what's happening to my team over. We started with infrastructure as a service in those data centers, so we run in a cloud-like manner there. Then we're spinning up resources in AWS, and then we also have assets that are in Azure. And so you can imagine, it gets complex. I have a very lean organization. And so you can imagine the complexities, the challenges, what is running where at any one time. Obviously we have concerns with security and observability of what's happening at any moment in time, and then being able to scale. And so with the emergence of Kubernetes for us, being that it has now become the platform for our developers and for us to be able to deliver our services, what I want now for multi-cloud is the same thing. I want things to be run in a declarative manner. I want to be able to run workloads on an abstraction that allows me to get the benefits of these cloud providers and be able to reach our customers wherever they may be at.
Okay, and Allan, I've often heard, you can tell me if it's true, that Kubernetes is going to finally make multi-cloud a reality. Why do your customers want multi-cloud?
Well, Kubernetes is making multi-cloud a reality. We hear from customers typically, they don't want lock-in, right? They want to be able to run wherever they want. They want the flexibility to move fast, but not lock into a particular cloud. And we've heard that loud and clear. And one of the reasons why we're really pushing Kubernetes so that customers can run it not only on Google Cloud, but run it anywhere, on other clouds. And it's not just about getting Kubernetes up and running. It's what happens after it's up and running. How do you do versioning? How do you keep, from the day 2 standpoint, keep things green? So our customers typically tell us, look, we've got a portfolio of 500, 1,000 applications, and we want to move to the cloud. But it's a 2 to 3 year journey. How do we get there? So our idea with multi-cloud is let the customer pick what cloud makes most choice, best choice for those applications, and do it in a way where it's consistent from both a developer and operations experience. And that's really how we're driving and thinking about multi-cloud. Finally, on the ISV side of the house, which is different from the enterprise, these software vendors basically want to build their software once, like write it once, develop it once, but then run it anywhere. And their customers could be on Amazon, could be on Google, could be on Azure, and that's really the types of use cases that we're trying to enable.
Great. And Eric, you were at Google and now Portworx trying to solve the data gravity problem. See, I wore my data gravity shirt, so I'd remember to ask you this question. So what does data gravity have to do with multi-cloud?
Yeah, I think when we think about Kubernetes and the abstractions, it's also important to think that there's no such thing as a stateless application. Right? So it's good to have abstractions for compute, but I don't have computeless applications. So I've abstracted the application, I've made it portable, but you're persisting something. You're persisting data. And if we're talking about real workloads, they're follow the sun, they're machine learning, there are different data services that have to be delivered around the world. There needs to be an answer for how compute and the data meet. And that abstraction is super powerful, but I need a solution that brings that application and the data together. So if I really want to be multi-cloud, if I really want to be able to deliver around the world and do these interesting real applications, I have to solve the data gravity problem, or we have to solve it as a community. So we have to be able to bring the applications and the data together, deliver it on any infrastructure. And actually, for someone like us at Portworx, it's what our customers expect, right? You're adopting Kubernetes because you're replatforming, or you're competing in some digital advantage. So you need to be faster into production, but you also need to be resilient and mobile. So that's where our customers are asking us, make sure that we're multi-cloud, make sure that we're able to run in public clouds, on-prem, and do it in any environment seamlessly. So it's core, and it's just been driven by customers that they need that data gravity addressed as well.
Okay, and my next question is going to go to anybody but Eric and Allan, because I want to know, for Realz, Eric actually named the panel, and I'm pretty sure Eric's 3-year-old son named the panel multi-cloud for Realz with a Z. But for real, does Kubernetes make multi-cloud easier, and do you need Kubernetes to do this as opposed to nothing?
I think it does. And mainly how I'm looking at it is just like the evolution that we're seeing of, okay, yes, the initial where Kubernetes started at and the use cases that initially served up, it kind of laid that groundwork for it. But then with the emergence now where we're seeing that we can start running all types of workloads and running them in a Kubernetes way, I think that's where the real power comes in at. Now, the concerns I have and the things that I'm starting to see, because I think a lot of us here, if you're at the conference, you're seeing a lot of different vendors starting to position different ways to accomplish this. We see things like Crossplane coming out with ways to have like a universal control plane. And when I look at a lot of what that architecture looks like, I mean, some of it speaks to me, but my concern is just like, one, it's great, it's open, but it looks like it's trying to do a lot. And I'm like, is this going to be something that I can serve up to my team? Because I come from an operation world, and so a lot of times the burden falls on us. And a lot of us who are operators will acknowledge that the experience above Kubernetes, it's all cloud native and it's great. But if you get into the lifecycle management of like what's happening underneath, Well, a lot of times we're working around a lot of that part of it to be able to, maintain upgrades, whether it's like security patching every 4 to 6 weeks, or, being able to know that, like the security's coming to you and okay, can you patch this quickly? And then imagine now you're trying to do this across a bunch of different cloud providers. And so that's where like the evolution of Kubernetes, and you're seeing things like, KubeFed evolve, cluster API, a lot of these things being as possibilities to be able to help you address these challenges. So I believe that this is going to be the route that it's going to be for us, multi-cloud, I think for a lot of other users. But I do think that there's still a lot, especially with industries that have heavy regulations or enterprises, because we do got a lot of legacy industries or legacy things we need to plug in. And so that's where some of the challenges come in at. But I do like, the controllers, the CRDs, everything that's within it, I think is going to be able to provide what we need.
And you guys plug a lot of legacy things in as well, right? And I remember you were early adopters for OpenStack. Yeah, Umair.
I kind of wanted to expand on that a bit. So even taking multi-cloud out of it, so for us, we were early adopters of containerization. I mean, we started containerizing our workloads even before Docker. So we were LXC people. My first project when I started at Dreamworks 5.5 years ago was to get Cassandra to run inside of Docker. Docker 0.7. This was before Kubernetes, right? And so as far as enablement goes, doing what we're trying to do or what we have been able to do just in a local data center was almost impossible without Kubernetes, right? So running 1,200 Docker containers across 15 different database application types, persisting the data, taking the backups, and doing all that workload that we have, having to worry about IP addresses and DNS and service discovery is onerous, right? So those abstractions that Kubernetes provides makes that so much more palatable for us. And then to be able to take that and then say, okay, we can just, whether it's infrastructure as a service or whatever it happens to be, just spin up some hardware in the cloud and replicate that entire stack is very valuable for us. And then to have the underlying abstractions like Portworx, where I don't care if it's a persistent disk in Google or if it's EBS or if it's a local disk in my local data center, that allows me to basically deploy the same resources anywhere. So yeah, absolutely, Kubernetes is very good.
I was going to say, don't swear. It's the best. Okay, that was the unbiased answer to my question. So now we'll get the chance for the people who have helped build this fabulous technology to add to that. Is there anything you want to add about what Kubernetes gets right to really enable multi-cloud? I'll direct that to Allan and Eric.
I think one thing that Kubernetes does really well is the API. I think the API has just been designed in such a way that lends itself to remove some of the friction associated with the underlying infrastructure, especially when you're running in environments that are very heterogeneous. The one area I think where there's still room for improvement is, as you think about multi-cloud and think about the different cloud providers, it's still a specialized skill set, right? Typically, in many of these organizations, large organizations where they are multi-cloud, there's an AWS person, there's a Google person, maybe an Azure person. I think there's still an opportunity over time to really abstract away some of the complexities around how people build applications that can really make it extremely consistent from a building, a build, deploy, and maintain standpoint.
So I agree with everything that the panelists are saying. I think Kubernetes got the abstractions, the built-in services right. So it takes applications, and now I can run it and not have to think about the automation that somebody else would have done. That's super powerful, and I think the abstractions have evolved. Like when we started, there were pods, and now we have daemon sets and stateful sets, deployment objects. But we also see, to the concern that Joseph, you're bringing up, I agree. Like there's now some splitting that we're seeing. What runs in Kubernetes, this distro, is being adapted in a different distro. And I don't know that that's stopping. And something that you've brought up that I also think about is everything running in Kubernetes is necessary. It's not sufficient, though. Every application, to the examples Allan and Umair are giving, they have to connect into some identity system. And so identity, access management, what I do about the whole entire tooling around it is not necessarily portable or not necessarily abstracted, or should I abstract it in some ways? So I feel like it's a problem that we'll have to figure out as a community, right? Kubernetes is the necessary ingredient. It's so much better than anything we had before. But to get to the multi-cloud world for real applications and for all applications, there has to be something that we come together at. And the concerns are the way the ecosystem is splitting a little bit. The conformance tests won't apply the same to extended objects. That makes sense, they're extended. But if all the core components are moving to extended objects, now I have a problem with saying this app runs across. So I feel like we have to figure that out as how do we make the meaningful parts core again, and how do we bring it so that it does solve the real problem of let me run, write once, run anywhere, and just think about it as what's the intent, not what is the actual underlying vendor design.
So now I have a question for you before I get to my controversial questions. So who here is running multi-cloud right now? Okay, so that wasn't even a third of the audience, and that's probably less than we thought. Although I've been crowdsourcing that question throughout the whole conference, and a lot of the folks, particularly from Europe, are saying it's about 2 years out. We're hybrid now, it's about 2 years out, but we're getting there. So that brings up my question, should everyone be planning multi-cloud, and should every application, stateless, stateful, every application be thrown into a multi-cloud environment? Who wants it?
I'll start. I say no. I say there are applications that doesn't make sense to move to the cloud and should remain on-prem. But at the same time, you want to get as much value from those applications as possible. So just because an application doesn't move to the cloud doesn't mean that it's like wasted effort, right? We're seeing a tremendous amount of investment in modernization of applications that are running in people's data centers. They don't need to be written off. They could join the club. I think we're in an environment right now where it's really the flexibility that Kubernetes provides to enable you to make that choice in terms of not having to lift and shift to gain the values of cloud native. You can start where you are and take advantage of it, and that's.
Yeah, I think it's the same question that developers have been asking themselves for years, which is, do I optimize something or do I abstract it, right? In many cases, there are good arguments for you to take those optimizations for a specific cloud provider, and others you do want to abstract it if you can gain economies of scale or whatever it happens to be. So yeah, I think there's cases where it makes sense, and there's cases where you might not need it.
Yeah, I was going to say very similar. I think we're kind of going through that right now, where we have to kind of assess. And I think I mentioned earlier, like one of the primary use cases within our data center is an application that is highly transactional. We get billions of packets per second per day. We're running bare metal as a service. We're running this application on an infrastructure as a service, and we're looking at the efforts like should we? Will we benefit if we go out there? And there's some marginal gains, but I think we've kind of realized like these are some core processing locations that we just think that for now let's focus on all the other things around that we get tremendous gains, and then we can revisit it. And for us, there's also like costs. That's one of the other drivers behind it, where it was one of the reasons why we actually repatriated this application back out of public cloud was, we found that we could run it in public cloud, but the types of instances and things we had to choose at that time, it was a driver to also bring us back on top of like maintaining like latency SLAs and things such as that. So I think you really have to do the due diligence on it and just challenge yourself to see, is it worth it? And especially in this current state, because you will be adopting, until some of these tools start to deliver and the promise of what we are looking forward to, you're going to be adopting some complexity and challenges, and you have to really weigh that out.
So I feel like I'm cheating because I'm going last and I'm stealing from you. So I'll say something. I'll say something different. I'll try to disagree. Right. I think legacy applications. I've seen companies send me documents about how mainframes are multi-cloud, and I don't quite understand it. but I'm sure there's an argument there that others smarter than me can explain to me, right? And so I saw PDF mainframes multi-cloud. The other one is, I think, I was talking to a telecom operator yesterday, one of the largest in Europe, and from their perspective, they're still trying to figure out how to hire COBOL programmers for their mainframes, right? I never learned COBOL, and I went to school in the 90s. So what I mean to say here is there are applications that don't need to be multi-cloud, don't need to be containerized per se. I don't want to touch that mainframe. It runs. Leave it alone. But all new applications, should they be designed for multi-cloud? Should they be portable to Kubernetes? And I think this is where I'll try to disagree and not steal, right? I think they should be, right? If I'm going to run this application, it's the future. Why design it with the baggage of what I'm trying to get away from, right? We don't want to get to a place where everything we did only lasted us for a couple years or for one life cycle. And something you said, Joseph, yesterday that is in my head all day was really that you're talking about the challenge of standing up consistent Kubernetes clusters. 3-4 years ago, we were trying to solve the challenge of standing up consistent applications. So the problem space has moved along, and that's a positive thing. But if 3 years from now we solved consistent applications, now we solve consistent Kubernetes, what's next? Right? Suddenly we're tied into only one infrastructure. I feel like we locked ourselves in yet again. So no to the COBOL mainframes. Somebody else please help us. And yes to all the future applications, which is kind of a cheat on my part. But
Are there any COBOL programmers in the audience? We might have a job opportunity to point you towards.
We'll get your card later and I'll connect you.
COBOL needies, I think, is that coming next?
Yeah, I think so.
Valuable experience. Okay, so Joseph, can AWS be multi-cloud?
Can AWS be multi-cloud? And what do you, you're confusing me here.
I'm messing with you a little bit.
Yeah, I know you are.
I told you I was going to get cheeky and controversial.
I mean, well, for me, like I said, I always just look for like what's best in breed, and for us, I kind of feel like, especially with the surface of like what my team is covering already, so I've kind of felt like that was like our first adoption. It was just like, look, I'm already spending all my innovation tokens in the data center. I don't want to risk it too much further by just trying to be like, let me get across all the clouds and try to deliver. But I mean, so for me, it was more like something that we knew, But previous to this, I was at another company where we were early Kubernetes adopters, and this is like, 1.0, and our aspirations at that company at that time was, we were looking for multi-cloud, and I was really selling it internally to our developers, and even at that time, it was very nascent to like take that view, but it's where I wanted to see things. And I agree, Eric, I think you're right. Like, we're looking at what we were wrangling and managing, just getting like, just the initial microservices up and running and getting them stable, keeping them, the life cycle going. And here we are talking about like trying to push this needle a little further, but it's a little bit more complex. And I do find what's most interesting about it is it seems, in my purview, that I'm noticing like companies like Portworx are talking about it. There's another storage vendor who proposed a KubeMove as a way to like data migration as a service, and you're seeing other ones coming in there. The only thing I'm just kind of wondering about is, are we going to see now the emergence of some, CSI type of movement where like we create like an open standard for all this multi-cloud efforts, or are we going to just have this fragmentation, or does it even need it? Is kind of where I'm still kind of pondering myself.
That's a hard question. I see companies building CRDs or abstractions for deploying to different cloud environments. You brought up a few examples, and I think those are interesting and powerful. How they become compatible and maintained. I mean, CSI is a great example. A lot of our customers have evolved in terms of what they require, and the ecosystem is moving so fast. So one reason people want abstraction layers is once you deploy enterprise applications into production, you don't want to be tweaking every few months. So you kind of need that ability to say that these stacks are making sure that everything is upgradable, in place, and stable. So in a constantly moving ecosystem, how do we get that unification? How do we do it across clouds? There should be some community effort. I think it's probably right now getting worse. And so I'll have to punt on that and come back with an answer later. Maybe Allan, I'll pass it to you. Maybe you have a thought.
I agree that CRDs are becoming the de facto standard for abstracting away like the underlying resources and complexities. I see CRDs, potentially extending beyond just Kubernetes resources. But I feel like, especially on the storage side, as stateful workloads become more mainstream, there is going to need to be some kind of agreement across the industry, right? Because storage is always the trickiest area to tackle, and and it's high risk, high reward. So I think folks like Portworx are very well positioned to be leaders in helping define that moving forward.
I think networking and security are also tricky things to tackle, and I run a lot of meetups on those. When I run a meetup on security on Kubernetes, it's packed. So there's still a few problems we're all solving. Remember, my DMs are open, so if any of you have a question, you can shoot it at me, and I will try and get to it. And I will ask a practical question now. So basically, if you want to get started on multi-cloud, what should be the first steps? They all want to get started. We all told them they have to do it, and only 5 people in the room said they are doing it. So tell them how to do it.
I mean, I guess you got to start with one, right? You just got to start developing for a cloud.
Yeah, get in the cloud.
Yeah, I mean, that's your first thing, right? And then, as anything, right, then you start backing off, generalizing, figuring out what's not going to work if you were going to deploy those same things elsewhere, and just start pulling back, layers of the onion.
Yeah, I was gonna say probably we've kind of learned this lesson of a few of us who've if you've been in the Kubernetes community. I mean, obviously we saw where a lot of the initial workloads started from. It was always like start from a safe place. Pick those things that are not going to risk your business, which that's an obvious kind of easy thing. But then if you started kind of trying to get practical, if I looked at like in my world. Like we started looking at like scheduled jobs. Like this was one we thought like, hey, we can actually do this, and actually it was an easy, safe way. We didn't have to do it with multi-cloud, but what we wanted to do is kind of tease out like all the things that we may have been not seeing. So it gave us a chance to kind of like, wow, I didn't think about like when we started running on this environment, it was going to introduce some challenges of like some scheduling orchestrations that we didn't think about, or even just kind of like working on our ability to manage lifecycle, across 2 different clouds. We had to like rethink what we are currently doing. So for me, I think it's the best way to kind of get yourself going.
I'll just jump in. Sorry. I'll say that we've worked with customers who are moving major retail chains to Google. And to your question, Lisa, how did they get started? I think if you want to go multi-cloud, something that they've done well, I'm thinking one in particular that's moving to Google, is that they picked a meaningful workload. And so they actually picked 3. And their goal is to correctly architect it, have that workload be representative, do it well, and then expand. So whether you pick 3 or 1, picking a very naive or basic application won't get you all the lessons learned. So I'm not saying it's a race to production, it's a race to learn. So pick a meaningful application, start, to Umair's point, start with one environment, use Kubernetes, but know that that application has to be representative of your end goal. And I think that's been something that I've seen go well. Whereas sometimes others will get started in the opposite end, and they'll start building applications, and they'll think, I don't need to solve that problem. I don't need to solve state. I don't need to solve identity. Suddenly, they have the second application get introduced, and they have to re-architect everything, right? So they chose the wrong example, and it's always easy to say that in hindsight, but I think get started, pick a cloud, pick an application, make it meaningful, and then that's a much better chance.
Yeah, I'll just say, I think people are usually too afraid of refactoring code or doing throwaway work, and that's why I made the point about start with one. It's okay to start doing some work, and then when you realize you have to go to a second cloud, you're like, well, I just wasted 2 months worth of effort, but I have to redo stuff. Like, that's okay. The opposite is planning for some moonshot and over-engineering something and realizing at the end of the day you're only going to deploy to one cloud. And in my opinion, that's more wasteful than the other way around.
You kind of preempted my next question, which is, are there any pitfalls, stuff we should make sure people avoid?
So I'm last, so I don't want to copy, but I'll take a different approach, actually, in the sense of I wouldn't treat it as a one-size-fits-all. I think it depends on who you are within the organization, right? So if you're a developer, right, roll up your sleeves and get into the cloud-native technologies. If you're a platform team, start to understand like what are the benefits that each of the cloud providers provides and what are the applications that make sense. Because the last thing you want to do as a platform team is build out an environment and wait for people to come, right? That's not the right, it's important to pick those applications that make sense and then build that process, show success, and then others will follow. If you're a network admin, you got to start thinking about the complexities associated with multi-cloud, right? How do you enable connectivity, especially if you have a hybrid, if you have your data center and now you have to, interconnect with the different clouds? How much is that going to cost? There's a lot of things to plan, right? If you're a security person, right, you're gonna see an environment where there's cluster sprawl now, right? Just like years ago we had VM sprawl. As more and more clusters come up in different environments, how are you going to secure those environments? How are you going to ensure that somebody doesn't come along and change things that are outside of the policy, especially if you're operating in a regulated environment? So just to close on it, I think it depends on who you are within an organization. But with Kubernetes, I think the one thing that I find that really helps in these environments is it enables all these roles that I just discussed to work collaboratively. You're no longer an obstacle to each other, which was in the pre-cloud native world.
Okay, I think maybe we have time for just one or two other questions, but is there a cost aspect to this? Is this going to be a cost savings thing, or are you going to have to go justify for a lot of extra cost from your upper management?
Well, in my perspective, a lot of the driving factor was cost in the long run, but it was, as an example, when we decided we needed to do some stuff in the cloud, we started solving for X provider, and then my management came back to me and said, you know what, we've been able to negotiate a deal with Y provider, so let's look at them instead. And it caused us, again, to throw away some work and have to do some stuff, but that's what made us be able to generalize some of the stuff that we were creating in order to be able to go out multi-cloud. And so that led us to, let's abstract all this stuff and be able to go to X, Y, or Z, whatever our management ultimately chooses.
Did I just hear you say it's a way to get cloud providers to negotiate against each other and lower the price? Wow, that's an advantage. Take note of that one. I think we're probably running close to time, so why don't we just wrap up if there's any last thoughts that anyone wants to leave with. And I'm going to start with that end, because you guys are always ending. Go ahead, Eric.
I'll say that it's been incredible to see the ecosystem evolve. We're all solving and trying to make the world better, right? So I've been in customer environments or conversations where they're not innovating, they're not doing something new, and that's very different. So we're up here talking about how to make everything better for the whole ecosystem. So I think this is the best place to go solve those hard problems. So Joseph, I'll go back thinking about what you raised, but I do think that multi-cloud is the pattern that helps build the applications that we want to run in a way we need to. So I think we're on the right track.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Exciting times, sitting from the cloud provider side of the house and just watching the ecosystem build and everything happening around us. It's a great time to be involved in Kubernetes, and I think it's only the beginning.
I was not expecting this question. I guess just, solve problems, I guess. Don't try to over-engineer things. Go with a real problem set, whether that means multi-cloud or not. Just got to be true to whatever it is that the problem is that you're trying to solve.
I was going to say, we're in an interesting space right now, where this is starting to evolve. And so to me, it's more like a call to action for a lot of you who raised your hands, who are looking towards multi-cloud, and even myself. What I'm trying to do now is get involved in these conversations now. Let's get involved in that community so we can help drive, because the key things I want to see is like things built, on open standards so that we have choice in it. And I think that's going to be driven by us in the community, by having our voice in there. And even for myself, the things that I'm really excited about is right now we're rethinking even how we're doing disaster recovery with this kind of approach. And so, it's in a cloud native way. So those are the things that are really exciting me. So like I said, I just advocate for more of us to get out there and have these conversations so we can help shape it in and make Kubernetes be this, that help us drive to accomplish this.
Well, thank you for having this conversation with us. This is how to find us. You can keep the conversation going. We will answer you. And thank you for attending this session. I look forward to getting to know all of you in person, so you can find us on the show floor and enjoy the rest of your conference. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Lisa.